introduction. And, there's a couple of caveats. Whenever you give a presentation about something, it's very risky because you say, well, why don't you do that? Well, I'm learning just like the rest of you are. The second thing, none of this is meant to be a criticism or anything else. It's a great service, and everybody works very hard when they give messages, and everybody cares, giving it for God's people especially. A lot of these principles can apply anywhere, though. It's not just in church. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring some of this out is that science has advanced so much, and they've learned so much about the brain and what impacts people and how people learn and how people remember. So we get some mileage out of this. We had actually put together an intro.
How to craft and deliver more powerful talks using brain science.
Why do we talk? Why do we communicate with speech? Well, if you think about it, isn't it really to influence another person or other people? Maybe it's to inspire, or to educate, or to comfort, or to amuse. But don't we want that communication to be as impactful and memorable and powerful as possible? I remember my first foray into public speaking was a speech I gave in high school. And I chose how to shoot a free throw. What's a proper technique for shooting a free throw? And the reason for that, it's something I was comfortable with because I was so nervous. Since then, I've had the opportunity to speak in a lot of context, in business and classroom and church, and I've always tried to improve. But a few years ago, I started to study deeply into how we learn, how the brain functions when we learn, how we remember, how we forget. And from that, I've learned some things that have helped me to be a more impactful speaker. And there have been such great advances in science in the last few years that have enabled researchers to actually sort of know how the brain takes in information and encodes it and stores it and retrieves it, and about how we forget. I mean, most of what we hear or see is forgotten very quickly. So from that, then, we can take the science and we can apply techniques to preparing our talks, whether in a formal context or whether informal conversations, so they can be more memorable, more powerful, more impactful. And after all, isn't that what we all want if we're going to communicate? And speaking in any context is a skill. Communicating is a skill. And it's just like learning to shoot a free throw. You can take in the knowledge, you can practice and drill and rehearse and get better. You can get better. And it doesn't matter if you've never given a speech or you've been speaking for 40 years. We can all learn new techniques and become more powerful presenters. I'm Steve McNeely, and I'm very pleased to present this course we've developed, how to craft and deliver more powerful talks using brain science.
Done right, a talk can electrify a room and transform an audience's worldview. Done right, a talk is more powerful than anything in written form. Writing gives us words. Speaking brings with it a whole new toolbox, skills that can galvanize and empower and inspire. Like all good movies or books, a great talk is transporting. Absolutely one of the most powerful things you can experience when watching a talk is inspiration. The speaker's work and words move you and fill you with an expanded sense of possibility and excitement. You want to go out and be a better person. Inspiration can't be performed. It's an audience response to authenticity, courage, selfless work, and genuine wisdom. These are all things about very powerful public speaking. About Christ, it said in Matthew 7:28-29 that the crowd was astonished at Jesus' teaching, for he taught with authority, not like the scribes. He was a powerful and effective teacher. He was a powerful public speaker. John 7:45, officers were sent to arrest Jesus, and they returned not having done that. Why? What did they say? Does anybody remember? No man spoke like this man. No man spoke like this man. I'm not going to arrest him. Those who disputed with Stephen in Acts 4, what is said about him? He was full of faith and power, and they were unable to resist the wisdom and spirit of his speech. He was a powerful speaker. My objective for this little course is just to convince you to incorporate some brain rules into your speaking preparation and techniques. Now, the roadmap will talk very quickly about how the brain works. I'll talk about 3 key connections, and then I've got a handout and some questions. Take some questions if we have time. So one of the things is we're so fearfully and wonderfully created, and we have all these pathways, but there's something that's built into us that we'll go into in a second. We are wired to forget. We're wired to forget. 90% of what we hear in a class is forgotten in 30 days. 90%. 70% of that forgetting is within a few hours, research shows. Meaning, sadly, by the time we get home tonight, a lot of what you worked very hard to present today is going to be lost. It goes into our short-term memory, does not get transferred, or there's not a pathway to our long-term memory. Learning is 3 steps. One is the encoding when we receive information, and then they call it consolidation, where it kind of goes into your long-term memory, and then retrieval, the ability to bring it back. Scientists think that we don't lose any data. There's nothing that we take in our whole life. It all gets in there. The problem is we can't get it. It's like if we find a gold mine, we're rich. But we need a road to get to the gold mine, or we forget how to get to the gold mine. We can't spend the gold. And it's like that with much of what we do with human beings. We forget 70% of what we hear in a matter of hours, 90% in 30 days. It's gone. We can't recall it. Now, this talk is about 5 minutes, but I think you're going to find it very fascinating. This guy's really interesting. And his talk is called Forgetting is a Part of Memory.
But what I want to put to you today,
I sliced into the middle of this.
Forgetting is a perfectly normal part of memory. In fact, it's a necessary part of memory. And I will try to explain this in terms of the way the brain forms memories and the processes that are involved.
What is a word that he said kind of over and over again, though? Connections. It's connections. I mean, we have the ability to rewire our own brains or to rewire the brains of other people by strengthening these connections. And that's really a lot of what we're going to talk about here in a minute. And there are ways in our speaking that we're able to strengthen connections early on and try and interdict this natural forgetting process. Now, there's research that's been done then to show what we remember. What we remember. In Brain Rules, as he says up here, he says if keeping someone's interest in a lecture were a business, it would have an 80% failure rate. And of course, he's talking about school, he's talking about in business, not just in church. One of the blessings we have in church, it's a blessing and a curse, I think. We have a command assembly. You know, people have to be here. Sometimes we might want to ask ourselves, would people come to listen to me speak if they didn't have to? It's a fair question. George Jessel, the famous humorist. Anybody know George Jessel? Dad, you're about the same age as him. Well, no, he's been dead for a while. But he was a famous sort of raconteur, and he spoke at weddings and funerals. And he said, our speaker will not bore you with a long speech. He can do it with a short one. But in Brain Rules, he talks about the fact that one of the first keys for us, because we think so quickly, is that we have to pay attention to even having a shot at remembering anything. And that our brain doesn't pay attention to boring things. It just doesn't. Our brain will flit around and look out the window. And again, we're lucky in here because people are focused, they're reading their Bible, and they care to. So we can cover things that are a little drier, perhaps. But he says this, multitasking when it comes to paying attention is a myth. I am talking about the brain's ability to pay attention. It is the resource you forcibly deploy while trying to listen to a boring lecture at school. It's the activity that collapses as your brain wanders during a tedious presentation at work. The attentional ability is, to put it bluntly, not capable of multitasking. So one of the challenges we have is to help people pay attention. To make an impact, there has to be a human connection. You can give the most brilliant talk with crystal clear explanations and laser sharp logic. But if you don't first connect with the audience, it just won't land. Even if the content is at some level understood, it won't be activated but simply filed away in some soon to be forgotten mental archive. So it doesn't matter if your stuff's brilliant, if your facts are accurate. If you don't connect with your audience, it's not going to land. It doesn't land. And look, I need to make clear, some of this stuff applies in business or whatever. In church, anytime we have our noses in the Bible is a good thing. So I'm not disputing that. But we also want to make sure there's not opportunity lost, because that moment is never coming back. That moment to address anybody is never coming back. And so we really need to make the most of it. The emotional connection, I'll just read this little part out of Brain Rules. What we can say for sure is that when your brain detects an emotionally charged event, your amygdala, the part of your brain that helps create and maintain emotions, releases the chemical dopamine into your system. Dopamine greatly aids memory and information processing. Dopamine is a good drug. Take all the dopamine you can. You can think of it like a Post-it note that reads, "Remember this." Remember this. Getting one's brain to put a chemical Post-it note on a given piece of information means that information is going to be more robustly processed. It is whatever teacher, parent, and executive, and I should say preacher, wants. Something that tells the brain, this is emotionally connecting to me. This information connects to my soul and my spirit and my emotions. I need to remember it. The third key area is organization. And I won't go into this a lot, but the brain likes organization. And again, I've learned a lot of this through trial and error, and I certainly don't do it perfectly, and I've made a lot of mistakes. So we'll talk about some of those. I used to believe that the best way to present something was to make people think about it, pardon me, and come to their own conclusions. So if I dangle the facts out here and I walk down the path, people are going to automatically come to the same conclusion that I want them to. Nothing could be further from the truth. The brain likes organization. It wants to know where to put the stuff and how to get back to it. It wants to know how to connect to it. And the brain likes to start with big pictures and drill down to details. It likes context because that context helps it know where it stored it and how to go get it. How did Jesus Christ teach? Parables. Now listen, he was saying, so they don't understand and you will, but later they were revealed. He used stories. He used something that was relevant to them in the day and to making these great lessons. I think about other things that is used in our spiritual walk for emotion. What about the festivals, honestly? There is a great deal of emotion involved, not only from Passover, but to the feast. The feast is a feeling time. All of us get feast fever, right? And that's an emotion. So I think to Mr. Trebig's point, one of the things that can make and I'm struggling with this and working with this and trying to learn this, but if we can interject these little stories or vignettes or parables when we're making points that tie to the through line, the science shows that's going to create this little bit of dopamine, or it's going to give context, or it's going to give us empathetic emotion to help us remember. Because otherwise, it's in and it's out. So again, my objective today is just to convince us to hopefully consider some of this. Not that not that we have cookie cutter or template sermons or anything like that, or messages or anything else, sermonettes, but that we think a little bit about what gives our intense efforts a little more shot at being remembered and being more powerful and more impactful and certainly probably more inspiring, I think. We have the opportunity to change the world when we speak. It may just change one person's world, Thank you, John. But people are wired to forget. People are wired to forget. So we have to create connections. We have to create connections. We have to create human connections and emotional connections, and these organizational connections. And the emotional ones are stories that are relevant. And if we can do something where it actually conjures a memory inside of a person where they had a similar experience or a similar emotion, you double the opportunity of having it remembered and being relevant and being powerful and impactful. Because we're emotional creatures.